Welcome in. My name is Bryce Koon, and it's a interesting time to be a Georgia Tech fan. We welcome you into Swarm Talk here on the Crowded Booth. The Jackets with a lackluster performance up in Blacksburg, a tough loss. So we're going to talk about it. What does it mean? What the heck's going on with the offense and how disappointing it really is because of how well this defense has been playing. They've made strides, and if you don't want to believe it, well then you're just not looking hard enough. It's the Swarm Talk brought to you by the Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.
We welcome you in here on a Sunday evening. We're typically every single Sunday evening we're talking Georgia Tech football here on the Crowded Booth YouTube channel. We haven't been because we've had the opportunity to do it on Saturday afternoons after the games, but this is a Sunday night reaction show. So lock it in. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Check us out over on the X feed as well, and follow us on all social medias. Shout out to my guy, Zach Nagy. He and I combined for a nice little live reaction on Kyle Field. I don't know. We didn't tell anybody we were doing it. I don't know if anybody even saw that we were doing it. We went live on Saturday night and recapped that just collapse inside Kyle Field. I made it back from College Station. For folks that don't know, long story short, I ended up missed my flight, had to drive from Baton Rouge to College Station, 5.5 hours. Ralph and I talked for a nice, Ralph, it was almost about an hour and a half. We had a nice conversation. It was good stuff. So we appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. I want to get your thoughts. I want to read the room. I want to read the temperature of the room on this team here in 2024. And I want to get down to brass tacks. Before we do that, Ralph, let's throw up that beautiful image of our presenting sponsor of Swarm Talk. It's Section 103. They do a fantastic job. It's some of the best gear that you're ever going to find in terms of just bottom line, in terms of comfortable, wearable gear. You know, we talk about quality depth on a football roster. How about quality apparel for what you need? This is the best Georgia Tech gear by far on the market, and you can use code CROWDEDBOOTH for 10% off your first order. We are going to see if we can expound upon that deal so that you can continue to take advantage of that, but they do a great job. They are the presenting sponsor, and big thing, they're the reason we get to do this show each and every single week, multiple times a week in the Georgia Tech shows. We appreciate the folks over there at Section 103 and all that they do. Ralph's in the background. He is here, ladies and gentlemen. He's here on a Sunday night. Will Mann is nowhere to be found in the stratosphere. Will might be he might be feeling himself a little bit after that win at Kroger Field. Where's Ralph? He's right there. I want to get to a lot of things tonight. And Ralph, I've got 3 points in there, but I want to start off with this before we get to anything that, no, whoa, time, hey, no. I want to get down to kind of the brass tacks here of what this team is. You know, in the preseason, you know, Vegas had this team at around a 5-win, preseason win total. And I think a lot of people saw that as, disrespectful. I think a lot of people kind of saw that as, this team should be better. You know, I went into the season, I thought that the range of wins could sit between, 6 to 8 if things really hit right for this team. And you could make the argument, well, we could have if this. Well, if is one of the biggest terms used across college football fan bases, and I just happen to be covering a team, obviously with the Crowded Booth, and covering a team in my full-time job that both used a lot of the if words this past week into what could happen. And bottom line is that's the beauty of our game. Some weeks you're heartbroken. Other weeks you're on the other side of that if, and you love to be on that other side of that if question. So all that to say is within the scope of this season, things are disappointing. When you take the 30,000-foot view, this is right about, in terms of this juncture of the season, that I predicted this team to be in, I think large portion would have said heading into the back half of the schedule, if you're 5-4, that's wouldn't surprise a lot of people. Now, all that to say is we're not looking at the 30,000-foot view. We're not we're no longer in the months of July and August. We're in the trenches. And we are in that week to week grind, that week to week battle of where the microscope is so tightly focused that overreactions happen, suggestions happen, assumptions happen. And so I think that it's fair to say this is about what this team is. And I think it's fair to say that Vegas, 9 games in, has pretty accurately represented what this team is so far here in 2024. Georgia Tech is an average football team that's highly dependent on its quarterback to win football games. That's not a knock on Georgia Tech. And Ralph's in the background, he can maybe agree with this. There's probably 40 other programs that if you took away their starting quarterback would suffer the same fate that Georgia Tech has. And it's been a roller coaster ever since Haynes King has been out. But it does speak to a lot of the preseason assumptions, because we run into this every single year. Well, last year this, last year that. This year doesn't care what last year did. This year doesn't care that you had the best rushing attack in the ACC. This year doesn't care that you returned AB. Just because you return people does not mean, and I beat the table Brian Kelly style, water bottles beware about this all through fall camp. Last year does not matter in terms when you actually go out there and play the games. You can draw from it. We all have to draw from it. But it can't completely direct the course of action and when you start to predict things. And we're seeing that. Sometimes retaining, sometimes just retention in general, the progress isn't always linear. And I think that's what Georgia Tech's seeing right now is, some of the things they were great at last year, it just hasn't come to fruition. So that to me is about where I thought this team was. It's not surprising for this team to be 5-4, in my opinion. Some of the things that we've learned about this team definitely make it surprising. But I think that we sit here, and if you told your July self Georgia Tech would be 5-4 going into Miami, going into the bye week before Miami, and then obviously having Miami, NC State, Georgia, if you told them they were 5-4, I don't think people would have been overly shocked by that assumption. Now, some people have, and I think it's always fun to play the game Candyland every now and then. We're going to teach my daughter how to play that game. I prefer not to live in Candyland. And that makes some people think that I'm just a Debbie Downer that hates the program. I can assure you we would not dedicate the time and effort on our own dime to make this show happen. So, just bottom line. It's about where I thought this program was and this team was. It's not overly shocking. Now, that's the 30,000-foot view. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty. So, Ralph, the point number 1 here. Let's go right here. The quarterback situation and the offensive woes. I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people that are around the program, inside the program, and just they've got a good scope on what's happening, over there on, Techwood Drive. This team is so overly dependent on the quarterback position, as are a lot of other ones, that when you have removed the playmaker, things got a little bit rocky. We saw in the Notre Dame game that Zach Pyron looked confident at times, looked a little bit rusty, which was to be expected. No knock on him. But overly, he played to a point where you're like, okay, this is what you can work with. You get him more comfortable. You get him more snaps. You've got a running back that, for lack of better words, you're going to run into the ground and literally get this kid injured if you can't find something else. Because Jamal Haynes is a very good running back. But now, without Haynes King in the fold, you're overly dependent on number 11. Running back depth is all over the place. The interior of the offensive line continues to struggle. I want to give credit to Virginia Tech. They've got some NFL dudes on that defensive line. I mean, they got a kid that's got 11.5 sacks off the edge. I mean, that's just not, you don't just luck into 11.5 sacks. You have to do something right. Your wide receivers, you like Singleton and Rutherford. I think that you have flip-flopped with having a third option at times. The tight end position's been decimated, and it just hasn't been utilized, I think, the way that people wanted it to. So that's a look at the offensive woes. And despite all of that, you're still good in a lot of the numbers. But I think if we're just being frank and honest here, the stats aren't abysmal offensively. When you look at the conglomerate, the whole season, it's more of just it just doesn't feel the same. And I don't think that's a controversial point. The numbers aren't far off, but it just doesn't feel as exciting and as explosive as we saw last year. I think a large portion of that is the fact that this run game hasn't been as dominant as people thought it would be. And look, folks, I mean, you have to understand the nature of college football. When you have a year like you had last year, where you led the ACC in rushing, you had a dynamic quarterback who had turnover issues. Teams knew coming into this year that, okay, if King corrects what he does, they're going to be one of the top teams in the conference. Like, that's a safe assumption heading into the season. If Haynes King turns down on turnovers, this team can be tops in the conference. And a lot of people ran with that. And I'm not saying that you can't have hope as fans. What I'm saying is that you have to be a tad bit realistic, because if you know that average fan sits at their office job from 9 to 5, no knock. But if you know that, I guarantee you that senior defensive analyst at Louisville knows it, that analyst and defensive backs coach at Syracuse knows it. Brent Pry knows it. Manny Diaz knows it. Like, the inability to run the football is surprised a lot of people because of how much success you had last year in that category. And I think it's been a direct reflection of this offense hasn't looked, for lack of better words, it hasn't looked as sexy. There was a sex appeal about this offense last year. You don't have that this year. It's been, even when it's going well, it's been discombobulated in some form or fashion. So for you to kind of be 5-4 where you are, you've beat all the bad teams on your schedule in terms of teams you're better than. You've got a solid win against a Duke team that literally almost knocked off a top 25 SMU team last night in their own backyard. But when you've gone against teams that are either close to your talent level or better, things have been all out of sorts. And so I'm not here for the excuses. I'm not here for, a lot of different things. I understand that. I get that. Like, we're talking about that. But the offensive woes, it's just felt different. And I think a lot of people felt coming into the season, well, we were good last year, so we're going to be great this year. Well, if you know that you were good last year, and Brent Key, as we know, wants to have a physical identity of running the football, now everybody in the conference knows that. So, yeah, Haynes King has looked good. It hasn't looked overly explosive. He's been efficient. It hasn't looked overly explosive at times. And the run game, while you have some good numbers, it's also just, it just hasn't clicked, I think, how people want it. So that's kind of the offensive woes. And I was hesitant to use the word woes because I know that some just absolute jabroni is going to come in here or watch this and listen to this and go back and tell somebody, well, he just hates the program, offensive woes. He says we suck. No, I'm not saying you suck. It's just different. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. Like, the offense just feels different. It's not horrible. It just doesn't feel, it just feels weird. It doesn't ever feel like this group plays completely. I don't know if they've played a complete game offensively outside of VMI. And if you're not playing a complete game against VMI, then, turn in your ACC membership. No offense to the Key Dads. But that's kind of the offensive woes. Now, let's talk about the quarterback situation here for a second, because yes, Haynes King is the straw that stirs the drink. I mean, I said this was going to be the question heading into, it was going to be the question heading into the Notre Dame game. Who were you going to be? What is this team's identity when 10's off the field? We started to figure it out. It's really hard to win games without him. And it shows how valuable he is to this team. It shows how valuable he is as a player. He's a good playmaker. He's a good quarterback. And we're also seeing how overly reliant you are, the lack of depth you have elsewhere, outside the quarterback position, and how if you don't have him in there, it's just not the same. A lot of other teams would agree and say the same thing about this. So it's not a Georgia Tech specific issue. We're not picking on the little guy. No victim mentality here. If that is, go ahead and hit the unsubscribe button. But I just kind of think that in terms of the quarterback position, I alluded to it earlier. You left the Notre Dame game knowing, okay, look, they're more talented. You can tip your cap to that. Yeah, you made some, obviously, you had the special teams errors, but with Zach Pyron, everyone was like, okay, we can work off this. I'm still going to stand by this. I don't think Zach Pyron's a bad quarterback. I think the kid hasn't played a meaningful snap in 2 years. He's on the road in a good environment in terms of Hokie fans. And it's just hard to get into a rhythm when you haven't done that. Now, I can't talk to his preparation. I don't know that. You don't know that. No one knows that except for Chris Winkie in terms of the preparation of how he prepared as the backup quarterback. But I don't think that, people are so quick to just kind of throw out the garbage, they say. I don't think Zach Pyron's garbage. I don't think that he's terrible. I just think it's a situation where you have a kid who has some talent. His confidence got kind of shot early, and he didn't have any help around him. I mean, Georgia Tech just really didn't do anything offensively. I mean, when you look at this, yeah, Jamal Haynes had 47 yards. He averaged 2.6 yards a carry. You averaged 2.9. You know that Zach Pyron isn't Haynes King. So when you put him in a situation where you're not doing anything else, you're putting it on the shoulders of a kid that it shouldn't have to be put on his shoulders. If this offense was as good as I kept, people said I was downplaying the offense heading into the season. If this group was as good as people said it was going to be, well, then you should be able to throw in Zach Pyron, who has experience, and he shouldn't have to shoulder the load. Now, look, there's decision-making things that Pyron needs to get better at. I think it's a mental thing. I think it's in terms of the confidence being shot. You got to go back to the drawing board, and you continue to work with him, and he has to work on that, and that's fine and dandy. I don't think the kid's a bad player. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I just think that you just kind of saw that when you can't do anything, it's not an advantageous situation for that kid to walk into. And you also see how much Haynes King can get you out of jams. And it speaks to the player that he is, but also speaks to is this a word, Ralph? The incompleteness of your team. So that's where I sit with the quarterback situation. Now, look, Aaron Philo, Ralph and I were talking about this on my drive back from College Station. I think there's a lot of promise. I'm not taking anything like I didn't take a lot from Pyron's freshman year in terms of being thrust into action. That's a lose-lose situation for the kid. If he does well, awesome. Like that, anything that you get out of him, that's awesome. I mean, I'm not saying, and I want to make this clear, I'm not saying the kid wasn't, I'm not saying that the kid wasn't prepared, but in the back of his mind, he was probably like, well, Pyron's been playing a lot. Like, it is what it is. In the span of 3 weeks, the kid has gone from not really playing at all except in a blowout against VMI to playing meaningful snaps trying to lead a comeback against a conference opponent. Folks, it's a lot harder as you sit on your couch and you talk about these things. It's a lot harder than you realize to be able to shift that mindset, especially for a kid that's never had to do it at the college level. That's one of the growing pains and just the learning experiences that you have to go through. Very few kids walk into that situation and line it up. That being said, I like what I saw out of Aaron Philo. There's a reason that he broke Trevor Lawrence's statistical records. There's a reason that he was very, very good at the single A level. Do I think that's still a jump? Do I think that, people love the backup quarterback? He's always the most famous person, the most popular person among the fan base. But if you throw him in there, he's going to have his growing pains. It's a very rare scenario that you throw in the backup and he's just instantly better. Not everyone is Tua Tagovailoa in the 2018 national championship game. Not everyone is Trevor Lawrence when he gets thrown in for Kelly Bryant. So keep that in mind when you talk about these quarterbacks. It's not that. I think this is the most talented quarterback room that Georgia Tech has had in the past 5-6 years, maybe longer than that. That being said, you got to kind of figure out where you're going with this if Haynes King isn't healthy. Obviously, you got to use the bye week to get healthy. So that's the quarterback situation and the offensive woes. And the reason that I think myself and a lot of people are so frustrated with this is because I didn't think we'd be sitting here on October 27th talking about offensive woes. And the reason being Next point, Ralph. Is that the defense has made strides. That's what makes this so frustrating. This defense still has deficiencies. It has its own growing pains, but you've gotten better play and more consistent play out of this group than you did last year. And that's the frustrating about it. That's why a lot of people feel like and that's I think it's why a lot of fans are frustrated, because it does feel a little bit like a lost season in that sense. Because a lot of people are going to look back on this year and say, man, if the defense from 23 or the offense from 23 is playing with this defense, man, you'd really have a shot to get to 7-8 wins comfortably. I don't disagree with that. I think Tyler Santucci is an absolute gem of a hire. And in terms of what he's been able to do, the scheme, I like how they play defense. I like the effort that they play with. I have mentioned this and I've talked with people about this, and several of you know exactly, where this is coming from. The depth for them defensively is not where it needs to be in terms of consistently competing at a high level. It's just not. Not an indictment on the kids that are there and their character, but in terms of ACC level starting caliber players or ACC level rotational players, they're not getting the production out of the depth that they need, or they're not getting the production they want out of the depth that they have. It's just not there. So you're seeing, like, for a great example, is the linebacker spot. Kyle Eford is down. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Kyle Eford is a liability in coverage in his current state. Doesn't mean he can't change. I'm not going to label anything. It's just not good right now. And the numbers back that up. You have Jackson Hamilton, who's played some football, who's been serviceable there. You have EJ Lightsey, who was an uber talented recruit, athletic, transfers in from Georgia. The kid got shot before he went to Athens, suffered that injury, and then had an injury while he was in Athens that he hasn't played a lot of football. And then you've got a freshman that I've watched with my own eyes and thought could be a really good player for you in Tajay Butler. And we've seen in spurts how those guys have made impacts in different ways. It just hasn't been consistent. So in terms of the depth, a lot of teams are able to turn to have 2 or 3 linebackers that have experience playing not only in that system, but also meaningful snaps at the college level. Georgia Tech does not have that. The quality of depth is not there for them. And I left out Trinace Tatum, but he's obviously in that category as well. It's not there for them. Now, you can raise questions about recruiting, the lack of a linebacker in that class. Are they going to go to the portal? Do they just count on internal development? We will see. But the linebacker position is a great example. With Kyle Eford out, you're asking a true freshman who has the God-given ability, but he's never done it at this level. He's never done it. And so anything that you get out of him, you're going to see spurts, and then you're going to see frustrations as well. I think that's the nature of this defense. The back end has veterans now in LaMiles Brooks and Clayton Powell-Lee. We've seen Tay Seymour rotate in. The rotations at the safety position are interesting. I would use that word, as I was told. The cornerback position, I will be honest with you, I haven't hated the cornerback position. I think Warren Burrell, and I've been saying this since fall camp and kind of maybe spring practice, Warren Burrell impressed this staff from spring practice with his knowledge of the game and his playmaking ability. I don't think he's a high flyer. I don't think he's a massive game-changing type of player, but I think he's got a relatively high floor in this Georgia Tech defense, and he has shown that at times. Amari Harvey, kind of been hot and cold, but when he's hot, he's pretty freaking good. You've seen Saeed Gibbs. You've seen other guys as well. They've got some depth there. They have to build that. And then the defensive line. Look, Jordan Vandenberg has been a really nice pickup for them. But if you want to be a good defensive line, you've got to have about 2 more of those at the minimum in terms of interior defensive linemen. You have to have that. I think Georgia Tech has the frame of guys that they'd like. They've got the idea of some of the players on the roster they want, but the production hasn't matched it. And I think it's really easy for people. And look, we got in spats, arguments, whatever you want to call it, debates about this all off season. It's really nice to look on a roster card and see a guy at a certain height and weight. But if that person's not being the consistent impact player that they need to be, There's no use in talking about that. You're talking about untapped potential that hasn't been realized yet. And this team needs that now. So it's just they're not there. The roster isn't there from a depth perspective defensively to fully utilize what Santucci wants to do. Now, next year, if you're still talking about some of the same problems from a development standpoint and whatever they add through the portal high school recruiting, that's a different conversation where I think you could lay more blame on the defensive coaching staff. I like this defensive coaching staff for Georgia Tech. I'm excited to see what Kyle Pope and Jess Simpson can do in the offseason as they get into the weight room, as they get a full normal offseason where they're not transitioning into this job, but rather they are helping guys develop. They're on the recruiting trail and they're working the portal with a year under their belt in Atlanta. I like the direction of where the defense can go. You just need to understand that this is something where, for lack of better words, you're learning as you're having the growing pains. We saw offensive struggles in this game. Everyone's watched it. I mean, it wasn't pretty. Defensively, your defense did everything that they could. I mean, legitimately, this defense did everything that they could. Virginia Tech had 233 total yards of offense. If I would have told you before the game that Virginia Tech would run for under 100 yards, you said Georgia Tech's winning that game. That's what makes this so frustrating. The Hokies were 2 for 15. Ralph, I'm reading these stats for the second time, and it's still ridiculous. Virginia Tech was 2 of 15 on third downs. Average yards per play was 3.8. That's not really that great. Average yards per rush was 3. In the red zone, they did go 3 for 3. You know, it's just one of those things where when you look defensively, you had 11 tackles for loss in this game. My Lord. This defense racked up 11 tackles for loss. There's improvement. There's legit improvement from this. And I think that's the frustrating part of it, is you go on the road in a game that was very winnable. Your defense played their tail off, and you just needed an offense that was supposed to be a strength. And I get the backup quarterback situation. I understand the lack of running back depth. So what does this prove? It proves that all that hype and talk in the preseason and the trash talking on social media, you aren't who you thought you were. And that's directed at some fans, not inside the roster, but you're not. You're just not that. And it's disappointing. It is what it is. I think that there's some pieces that you can pick up and move along to this season. And that's what we'll talk about next. Frustrating, though, because this defense has made strides. I like the way they're going. I'm excited to see how they develop, and I'm excited to see what this group looks like, next season. All right, Ralph, let's move on to the final point here. You enter a bye week. Where do you go from here? Where to go from here? You've got 3 games. You've got to win 1 to get to a bowl game. What's the likelihood that you lose out? I'm not going to say that it can't happen. And I am more harsh on the program. I'm not a sunshine pumper. It's well aware. What I will sit here and tell you, though, is there's nothing that Georgia Tech has done. And I feel like I've been saying this for 4 years as I debate people on this topic of, well, we should do this. You shouldn't do anything. There's no data points to prove that you can walk in and just based off an opposing team's record that you should beat them, because you haven't consistently been able to take care of business. And I don't necessarily feel that records are the best indicator of what a team really is, because there's different schedule records. I'm not saying that NC State's a great football team, but I'm saying is the expectation is, well, we're going to finish 6-6. You hope. You don't know. I mean, I don't know how anyone can know that outside of you can't confuse your hope for a fact. It's not a fact that Georgia Tech's going to go beat NC State. It's hope that they will. I think you can. I kind of think you will, but I don't know that. Nobody knows that. You face Miami, there's a conversation afterwards kind of blew me away a little bit in terms of, call me crazy, but I think we could beat Miami. Once again, I don't know where that comes from other than if you're just banking on college football chaos. Like, Ralph, am I wrong in that? Like, I don't know. I don't know what you're going off of. Now, if you get Haynes King back and Jamal Haynes can rest up, okay. But even to what we've seen this season, it's going to have to take a lot of things to go right. I'm not saying these things are impossible. I'm not saying that going to Athens is when it's possible. Anything can happen. College football has taught us that. I don't think it's likely. I would say it's highly unlikely. But what I'll say here is where you go from here is you have to get healthy. If you don't get healthy, none of this matters. And so I think that we just kind of sit here, on Sunday, October 27th. I know a lot of the fan base is a little bit dejected. A lot of fan base is a little bit down on this. You just sit in a situation where you kind of have to figure out where you go from here. You have to get healthy. You have to go back to the drawing board and figure this stuff out. One of the biggest telling signs of Brent Key in that post-game press conference, you could tell there's a little bit of a sense of just being dejected. Not a lot of eye contact, not necessarily a lot to talk about. It just is what it is. And I kind of agree with him in that. There's not a lot that you can say, especially when some of the questions that are being asked are being asked. But there's not a lot that you can say in that press conference with the way that you play. You just didn't play well. And special teams isn't sharp right now. The offense is banged up, and defensively, you did enough to where you should win, but offensively, you just can't. You can't find that rhythm. You can't establish run. You can't help out the two young quarterbacks that you have because you can't run the ball. That's why I'm not big on the excuses of the quarterback, because I think Zach Pyron's talented enough to go help you win a football game, but you can't run the ball. So it is. You can call it creative play calling. You can call it whatever you want. But you got to go back to the drawing board. You got to figure something out for these final 3 games. So we'll see what happens. I'm not saying that you can't win 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3. I just think that at this point in the season, to assume that you would do anything, good or bad, would be a little bit out there. I have no idea how this season's going to end. I don't know. I don't know if you're going to go 5-7. I don't know if you're going to go 7-5. I just don't. I don't know. And I think it's really hard. It's a fan perspective and a fan view to just say, well, this is what we're going to do. You're hoping that happens. There's nothing to go off of. And if you get it right, you're lucking into a prediction because no one knows that. So it's going to be interesting where this goes from here. I mean, this is a frustrating loss. It's disappointing the last 2 weeks, more in the way that you have played. You lose Notre Dame. That's it is what it is. Notre Dame's a better football team than you. It's more the way that you lost it. This game up here, such a winnable game against Virginia Tech that's disappointed this season. They're still alive in the ACC race, by the way. I just think that Georgia Tech's one of the teams in the country, and a lot of them are like this. You just can't assume anything. We have to see. This group needs to get into the bye week. They need to regroup, get ready for Miami, and then they get a bye week right after Miami before they play the next Thursday against NC State. And then obviously clean old-fashioned hate on a Friday night in Athens. Anything can happen. I think it's important to send this senior class out with a back-to-back bowl win, something that you haven't done, and please correct me if I'm wrong, since 2014, 2015, going back to back-to-back bowl games. That's important. It's important in terms of recruiting. It's important in terms of brand identity and playing a game in December. Trust me, recruits pay attention to that. Am I right, Ralph? If you're playing football in December, whether it's in the playoff, whether it's in the Sun Bowl, whether it's in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, it matters. It really does matter in terms of being able to do that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I don't know. I think this will be interesting. Hal Rhodes says 13-14, not 15. Hal, I think I got that confused because, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the bowl game in the year 2015, but it was the 14 season. If not, it's the 13 and 14 season. So I do appreciate that. But it'll be interesting. Where to go from here? We'll see. We'll see what this group does. I'm not assuming anything. It's more of providing some analysis, seeing what happens, because this team hasn't proven that they can consistently do anything, bad or good. It just, you don't know. You don't know if it's a Jekyll and Hyde It just feels a Jekyll and Hyde type of act right now. We'll see what happens. You got to get healthy. Getting Haynes King back for the Miami game can make all the difference. It really, really could. Get that at home. I don't know if that's going to be a night game. We'll have to see. I think Georgia Tech losing this weekend does damper the opportunity for that, but it is homecoming, so we'll get a better look at that. My name is Bryce Koon. Ralph Larry in the background. This is Swarm Talk. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you like the video. We'll be live tomorrow night, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern, as we walk through week 9 of college football, and a wild one it is. I was able to experience just an unbelievable atmosphere over in College Station. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about more. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Shout out to Ralph for being in the background. Thanks for everyone for watching. We'll catch you next time here on Swarm Talk, brought to you by the Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.